Have you ever felt that a game's reputation is undeserved, or that people exaggerate its pros and cons? That's largely how I felt when revisiting Tomb Raider 3. The internet warned me that this game was unfairly difficult, frustrating, and represented a burned-out development team that actively hated the player base. Despite that, I found it to be one of the most engaging entries in the series so far. I did own and play Tomb Raider 3 as a kid, but I also never finished the game. At least, not legitimately. I remember being killed as early as the opening slope and getting stumped by the pool of quicksand at the bottom. I know I played the first level of each continent Lara visited, probably through the level skip code, yet I also recall making no progress as I couldn't find a path forwards in stages like Nevada. So, here was my chance. It's been 27 years, I'm an adult now, I finally have Tomb Raider 2 under my belt, let's do this! I did have the strategy guide on the bookshelf just in case I got really stuck, however, I was determined not to use it unless I really had to. Actually, let's make a game of that. Take a guess right now as to how many times I'll have to refer to this strategy guide throughout my playthrough, and by the end, we'll see if you were right. Some of the internet's claims are fairly easy to verify. Tomb Raider was on a yearly release schedule, with a new game ready for every Christmas between 1996 and 2000. Toby Gard, often credited as Lara's creator, did famously leave core design after Tomb Raider 1's release. There is no shortage of interviews with key team members such as Heather Gibson, Gavin Rummery, and Richard Morton that openly talk about frustrations with Core's senior leadership team, their marketing teams, and Eidos as a publisher. That's all true. Equally, none of those interviews seem to express ire towards the game's players and fans. In fact, there's some optimism, with Tomb Raider 3 seeing upgrades to the game's engine allowing for new possibilities. The idea of burnout as the series went on is even contested, with Morton telling fan site Tomb of Ash, TR4 was my fave for sure. It felt like we were in a very good place as a team, we were firing on all cylinders, we knew what the engine could do, and what else we wanted from it. Likewise, from my experience playing through Tomb Raider 3 and seeing its changes and evolutions to the formula firsthand, I cannot agree with the notion that the developers wanted to frustrate players to the point of putting the games down for good. And that's what this video will focus on. I don't usually cover a game's development history in much detail. Channels like the Golden Bolt do a far better job of that than I ever could. What I want to share is my own playthrough, and whether I think you might enjoy the game based solely on the end product. With the engine improvements came some new moves for Lara, and this time we're actually taught them in a safe environment. Tomb Raider 3 reverts to using Lara's mansion as a formal tutorial, much like the first game, but still weaves in challenges and secrets, taking cues from Tomb Raider 2. We're shown that Lara can now crawl, which, don't most babies learn to crawl before they can walk? Our girl's doing it backwards here. It's an ability that would have been very useful in past outings and gets featured in some later stealth sections. More on that as we reach them. We can also sprint for short distances and dive out of it at the end, although the dive seemed pretty inconsistent and unresponsive. We get to put it to contextual use almost immediately, as a switch in the foyer opens a timed door that we can sprint towards and dive through. Or do whatever this was in my playthrough. Our reward is getting to view Lara's trophy room, featuring the Scion and Dagger of Xi'an from the previous outings, as well as, oddly, the Iris from Tomb Raiders 4 and 5. It's unclear whether this was intentional foreshadowing, or whether the team used the mangaka trick of reusing something previously insignificant to give the illusion of a grander plan. After learning the ropes in the gym, we can head to an updated version of Tomb Raider 2's Assault course to put our skills to the test. It now features a firing range at the end, with poor Winston being caught in the crossfire. Just, ignore my abysmal time. Safe to say I do not have the trophy for beating this in under 2 minutes and 20 seconds. If we do a couple of optional puzzles, we can get into Lara's secret aquarium. Here we get the key for the racetrack and can test out the new quad bike controls. Where Tomb Raider 2's vehicles use the same D-pad tank controls as the on-foot scheme, Tomb Raider 3 instead employs an accelerate button as well as reverse. This makes the ATV feel more realistic and intuitive while increasing its turning circle. We can't throw this around in quite the same way as we did last time. This doesn't teach us how to use every vehicle, we will get to the kayak in due time, and it also seems odd that this remastered trilogy didn't unify the controls across the 3 games. It's a little jarring to finish Tomb Raider 2, jump straight into 3, and have the vehicles work in a completely different way. Arguably, it's a catch-22. Change it for consistency, and you're no longer being true to the originals, but keep it as is and you break mechanical cohesion, taking the player out of the game for a moment. At the same time, this also applies to the on-foot controls. The crawl and sprint weren't backported from 3 into Tomb Raiders 1 and 2 because those games, and especially their level layouts, weren't designed with those skills in mind, and their inclusion could be game-breaking. Imagine this secret in St. Francis Folly, where you have to race to the bottom before a door closes. That would be an entirely different challenge if we had Tomb Raider 3's sprint ability, trivializing this section. When we're done, we can exit the mansion via the front gates, with Lara saying it's time for another adventure. I really like this. It feels like Lara is preparing before heading out, so there's some minor story context for this tutorial that we haven't had before. This is the full package, and my favourite iteration of Lara's home so far. So what is this new adventure Lara's embarking on, and is the plot an improvement over the previous games? I criticised Tomb Raider 2's story for featuring a series of contrivances, an antagonist Lara never spoke to, and generally providing a lack of player motivation. That is, thankfully, improved in Tomb Raider 3, even if core design copied their own homework. Tell me if you've heard this one before. Lara is on the trail of an artifact called the Infada Stone. While tracking it down, she meets a research team that seemed to be ahead of her. This team was hired by one Dr. Willard, who Lara encounters shortly after securing the stone. Willard attempts to recruit Lara, who is initially hesitant as she's just witnessed 2 of his employees end up dead at the hands of a third, who went mad and tried to murder her. She comes around once Willard explains that the Infada Stone is only one part of a 4-piece set. They were originally discovered in Antarctica by a group of Charles Darwin sailors, and have since been scattered across the globe. Willard offers Lara the artifact's current locations and more answers if she assists him. After securing the remaining 3 artifacts, Lara heads to Willard's base in Antarctica, where his men open fire despite Lara being invited and expected? Guys, this is not how you treat a guest. Oh, and there's a mutated employee she stumbles across too. I'm sure that's nothing to be concerned about, even if the trail through the level is literally marked with red flags. When she finds the Doctor's cabin, he then reveals his plan to use the artifacts to unlock the next stage of human evolution, before stealing the set and running away. By the time Lara catches up to him, he's busy transforming himself into a giant insect. Kind of a monkey's paw wish for old Willard there. So we have a villain who hires Lara, betrays her, and secretly wants to forcibly evolve humanity. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is just a less effective version of Natla, but I'll happily take Dr. Willard over the largely absent and forgettable Marco Bartoli. Sadly, Willard doesn't feature for the majority of the game's runtime. The game's split into 5 chapters, and we can choose to complete the middle 3 in any order. That means Willard only appears in the 1st and 5th chapters, less than half of the game. He's instead joined by secondary antagonists, one for each location and artifact. The first one we meet is Tony, who we spoke about a moment ago. This guy had creepy mannerisms and speech patterns, being off-putting from the get-go. He was made more memorable through having multiple interactions with him, alongside some cool environmental storytelling that make events somewhat ambiguous. That said, he hasn't had the staying power of cronies such as Pierre and Larson. The fandom seemed to treat Tony as a bit of a joke. Conceptually, his story is quite dark and sinister, but the execution, and especially his line delivery, is hammed up to 11, resulting in an odd dissonance. The fight itself is also pretty basic. We just run around in a circle, occasionally jumping. There's even a grenade launcher in the boss arena that I usually pick up after Tony's already dead. The next artifact, found in the South Pacific, is currently held by a tribal leader called Puna. We learn very little about Puna himself, but we do discover that his tribe are descended from the Polynesians who carved all 4 relics from the meteorite. They had fled Antarctica in fear when their children started being born with physical mutations. They're also cannibals. We find a downed plane and its crew, one of which has already had his leg eaten and is currently being prepared as the main course of something called the Feast of Smythe. As fate would have it, Smythe was one of Darwin's sailors who discovered the artifacts in Antarctica. Smythe unknowingly brought the Aura dagger back to its sculptors, only to be carved up and devoured himself as the original feast. The tribesmen themselves fall into a lot of stereotypes, from their homes to their clothes to their weapons. Let's just say that the game was developed in a different time, and that the chapter could be viewed as culturally insensitive these days. Unfortunately, Puna has very little build-up and impact. We don't even meet him until we're in his arena. He never speaks, and we only know his name from the level's title. I assumed he would have more of a presence given his tribe's contextual relevance to the story, which isn't even told to us by Puna. A random tribesman just so happens to give us context for a mural we find. Puna's boss fight is also kind of a joke. He has a one-hit kill beam, forcing us to constantly hop from side to side while firing at him on a relatively small platform over a bottomless pit. He takes the occasional break, becoming invincible as he summons monsters to attack us, and it all feels very repetitive. This fight also highlights how unbalanced the weapons are in Tomb Raider 3. Pistols barely put a dent in Puna's health bar, but an MP5 will tear him to shreds and end the fight in seconds. Sophia Lee resides in London, and is basically Puna but with some development and backstory. She's turned her Eye of Isis into another beam-spitting scepter, and where Puna is implied to be hundreds of years old, it's outright stated that Sophia used her artifact to make herself immortal. Sophia might just steal the show from Willard, with more development and a unique boss battle. After London's first level, we run into a henchman that says Sophia is in her late 20s to early 30s, but also claims his father and grandfather worked for her. At first, we just brush it off and assume it to mean they worked for her family. That is, until we get underground and meet the disfigured subjects of Sophia's failed experiments, who tell us, in no uncertain terms, that Ms. Lee used them to test her theories on immortality before applying the successful formula to herself. This gives her presence and impact long before we actually meet her. When we do cross paths with her, we race her rather than fighting her. Remember, she's immortal, so we can't outright kill her. At least, not without an electrified catwalk. Not sure why that's an exception. Surely immortality is immortality. Even so, the build-up to her, the mechanical shake-up to her boss battle, and her resemblance to Natla, both in physical appearance and being a female CEO who's much older than she seems, makes her a memorable villain. It's no surprise they brought her back as the primary antagonist of this game's expansion pack. With every other continent featuring its own antagonist, Nevada steps up to the plate and offers us, nobody? Nevada is weird. We break into Area 51, we let prisoners out of their cells, we kill countless government employees who are just trying to do their job, and then we steal a priceless, previously unknown element from a space-bending UFO. That would leave plenty of room for this artifact to be guarded by the head of Area 51, wanting revenge for his men, or a battle with the aliens whose ship has been impounded, but no, it's just sat right there. 2 regular enemies do try to shoot us as we approach our prize, but the whole thing ends in a disappointing anticlimax. Having each location feature a self-contained story, and being able to visit them in any order, certainly gives Tomb Raider 3 a more episodic and villain-of-the-week feel when compared with previous entries. While that's not necessarily a bad thing, and Chronicles would later attempt a similar concept, it does result in an uneven narrative where it's easy to lose sight of the bigger picture. There were certainly opportunities to weave Willard into these stories while still allowing them to play out in a non-linear order. The developers could have swapped the South Pacific soldiers with mercenaries employed by Willard. Maybe one of Sophia's experiments could have been a Willard crony, or perhaps she could name-drop him with a line like, "You're not the first person that Willard has sent for this stone." Nevada could have had one of Willard's men on the inside of Area 51, possibly unlocking Lara's cell. These would be small, easy-to-implement tweaks that would keep Willard and our larger mission in our minds throughout our playthrough. Even so, we interact with and learn more about most of Tomb Raider 3's 4 antagonists than we did with Tomb Raider 2's Marco Bartoli. And no, I am never going to let that one go. Overall, in terms of plot alone, Tomb Raider 3 sits below the more focused original game, but above the sequel. We'll see how that changes as we play more games in the franchise. Having this third game be split across 5 locations that we can choose from in any order presents a lot of game design challenges, especially for the difficulty curve. After all, how can the game's designers escalate the stakes when we could head anywhere and face these obstacles in any order? Is there a risk that, instead of a curve, we end up with a dissatisfying straight line? Join me on my personal journey through the game as we explore that problem and cause solution together. India is one of only 2 places where the level designers can guarantee the order of events for the player. Every playthrough starts here, so they decided to immediately put us on a death slide towards spikes. Welcome to Tomb Raider, bitch! Hope you didn't miss the shotgun right at the start that's buried under vegetation and impossible to see unless you already know it's there. In all seriousness, we are on stable footing and get a chance to look down before we start sliding. And the route isn't too bad, only needing a jump or 2 with everything being clearly telegraphed. As for the quicksand at the bottom that tripped me up as a kid, yeah, turns out there's a path straight past it through a doorway on our right. I don't remember any of the level from this point, so I can only assume that 1998 me was a really dumb 9-year-old who never found this and just level skipped past the stage. The next chunk of the level wasn't too strenuous. Kill a few tigers, make a few jumps, and pull a couple of levers. Fairly standard Tomb Raider fare. All of the basics get introduced and tested at fairly low stakes in what feels like a cheeseboard of the franchise's level, combat, and puzzle designs. What did surprise me was the stage's transition from being out in the jungle to emerging inside a temple. What would have likely been the end of one level and the start of another in the past, now seamlessly flowed into one another as a larger playground. The 2 segments then intersect in this wonderful climbing challenge. It's a classic layout in that if we were to draw a straight line between the start and end points, we didn't actually make that much progress. The bulk of our step count is spent going the long way around to both avoid drowning in quicksand and get the key for the final door. RIP this particular monkey. One weird thing about this level is its placement of secrets. 3 of the level's 6 secrets came within the opening minute of gameplay. The first is the shotgun, literally seconds after the level starts. The second requires us to get to the left-hand side of the slope, so we can awkwardly banana jump from this ledge to a hidden area. The third is then at the bottom of the slope, simply asking us to check out the pillars to our left. If you're curious, the 4th was for dodging this boulder and exploring the nook where it came from. The 5th was inside a pit. I never found the 6th, I probably walked straight past it. Feel free to tell me I'm an idiot who missed something obvious in the comments. Tomb Raider 3 thankfully reverts back to the secret design of the original game. Secrets are now useful standard pickups, and there's a varying number of them per level. I didn't look up the secrets for this game, as I wanted to experience a natural playthrough when formulating my opinions. As a result, I finished the game with just under half of the secrets, with my final total being 28 out of 60. Unlike prior titles, there is a tangible reward for beating the game with all 60 secrets in the form of an extra level. Of course, I haven't unlocked or played this, and I'm somewhat glad as looking up the requirements afterwards made me realise how frustrating that would have been. See, some levels have multiple paths with their secrets split between the 2 paths. That means we have to plan a route that transitions us from one path to the other, or we have to go pretty far down one trail before backtracking to the fork in the road and choosing the other direction. Add in your usual suspects of secrets that are missable thanks to one-way trips, often via the force of gravity, and we often find ourselves having to decide if we want to reload a save or accept missing a secret. Don't get me wrong, some of the secrets and their hints are pretty cool, such as this late game one involving hidden platforms that are revealed by giant glowing insects. Of course, they're flying enemies with collision, including as corpses, that seemingly spawn infinitely and will interfere with our jumps, making the execution frustrating, but the idea was at least novel. Overall though, no thanks. Hard pass. Getting all 60 secrets sounds like it would ruin the experience by requiring prior knowledge, adding extra backtracking, and completing some insane tasks. No bonus level is worth that much effort in my humble opinion. The items we pick up both as secrets and during normal exploration include the returning save crystals. On PlayStation, this is an interesting blend of Tomb Raider 1, where we had single-use crystals in set locations, and 2, where we could infinitely save anywhere. In Tomb Raider 3, we can still save anywhere, but we have to spend a save crystal to do so. They're basically Resident Evil's ink ribbons, only without needing to find a typewriter to use them. In the PC version, these collectibles were recolored green and restored Lara's health. Outside of that, we could still save anywhere, anytime. These remasters keep the PC version of saving anywhere, but New Game Plus adds the PS1 restrictions and PC healing properties back in. I still operated with multiple save slots, both to give myself a homemade level select by the end of the game, and to prevent locking myself into unwinnable situations with badly timed saves. Fortunately, Tomb Raider 3 seemed more forgiving in that respect. I can't think of a single time where I had to revert to a previous save. Every situation seemed salvageable. I'm glad I played the remaster, as I only found a very nice 69 out of a possible 95 save crystals, according to both my endgame results and a trophy description, while making a whopping, and slightly embarrassing, 173 saves. I can't imagine how annoying this game might have felt on PlayStation, where I could have only made 69 saves, likely putting myself in positions where I simply couldn't save my progress. The PlayStation Tomb Raiders ran the entire gamut of save systems, and there's probably an entire video in talking about the value of a save, the pros and cons of various systems, and what I prefer, but that's likely another topic for another time. Just know that if you are going to play this entry, the PC and remastered versions are much more reasonable, forgiving, and enjoyable based on their save systems alone. We're going to need those saves as we enter India's second level, Temple Ruins. This level has a reputation among the fanbase as being one of the hardest stages in the franchise's history, especially so soon into the game, but does it deserve that standing? I mean, kind of? Temple Ruins certainly has some difficulty spikes, pun fully intended. If this is someone's first Tomb Raider, then I could see them struggling and giving up here. It has some nasty traps and tough enemies, including these giant living statues that block our bullets with their swords. It's not afraid to throw us in the deep end and hope we can swim. Literally. If, however, someone has played Tomb Raider 1, or to a lesser extent 2, Temple Ruins becomes much more manageable. I personally found it to be a really fun level that has a little bit of everything. A perfect sampling of everything the series is known for. I especially enjoyed this area, where a short swim leads us to a precarious climb that at least has the safety net of the water below. When we reach the top, we're assaulted with a couple of gotcha traps before doing a short block puzzle and then running from some boulders to escape. It's pure classic Tomb Raider. I only got truly stuck in one area. We've got this incredibly cool room with invisible platforms suspended above a pool of water. They're highlighted by flame-spewing statues, no doubt showing off the lighting engine at the time. That takes us up to a switch, which opens a timed door we need to race through. Then we have to outrun a spiked wall to a key, running back towards the booby trap, and slipping out of the exit before we get skewered. So far, so good. The problem is that the pool of water is now a bog of quicksand, and those invisible floating platforms have crumbled. Trying to wade through the mud causes Lara to drown long before she can reach safety on the other side. This had me stumped for a good while, as I'd already interacted with everything in the room, and there was seemingly no way to bypass the sinkhole. I reluctantly relented to looking it up in the strategy guide. Guess what the answer was? No, seriously, I'll give you a second. Write it in the comments. The answer was, wade through the mud, but stick to the right-hand wall where the floor, which we can't see, is a little higher and Lara doesn't drown. Of course! So obvious. Why didn't I think of that? That one frustration aside, this level is fantastic. A standout moment involves the visual and environmental storytelling of finding Willard's men suspended in mid-air with a hole in one of their chests. We're left to wonder what happened, while simultaneously hoping we don't meet the same fate. Temple Ruins can be a tad long. My initial run took me around 90 minutes according to my footage, and there are a few ways of viewing that. One is that you can't have too much of a good thing, and this stage is just that. Another is that I suck at Tomb Raider 3, which, accurate. The other is that this could have been split into multiple levels, an idea which is reinforced by our next challenge. I had been warned about the River Ganges. I'd been told that the quad bike controls were cumbersome and that deaths would come frequently. That wasn't my experience, though. The level was over after only 11 minutes according to the in-game timer, which was 20 in real time based on my footage. Remember, in-game doesn't count deaths and reloads. Its brief length certainly gave me a sense of whiplash, especially after spending so much time in Temple Ruins. This may be due to being not only a vehicle stage, which naturally covers more ground more quickly, but also having a split path. I took the left path, which is essentially a vehicle assault course that, bar a tricky segment in the treetops, didn't put up much resistance. The right path, which I only briefly explored, seemed to be a more traditional Tomb Raider level that required getting off the quad bike to do a puzzle or platforming section, which then opens gates for our mini 4x4 to pass through. On a casual run, this was a fun, albeit brief level that offered a refreshing change of pace with a new gameplay style. In a completionist run, however, I can imagine it becomes difficult to cover both routes in a single run for all kills, pickups, and secrets. Maybe that's why I had a much better time of River Ganges than my friends. It could be that they wanted to see and do everything, getting annoyed at the split path. It might be that they simply chose the other path and got an entirely different experience. There's also a chance that the quad bike controls clicked with me, while other people couldn't get used to or plain didn't enjoy them. Let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I don't understand why this level is commonly hated. Next is Caves of Kalia, which is another short level coming in at just 5.5 minutes on the in-game timer. There's really not much to this one, just a short maze full of cobras and then Tony's boss battle, which we already discussed. I think I spent more time watching the cutscene that follows than I did playing through the stage. Having two longer levels in the forms of Jungle and Temple Ruins, followed by this duo of micro levels, gives this opening section of the game a very jarring pace. India sets players' expectations for the rest of the game, but this chapter left me unsure of just how big I should expect future levels to be. The other thing that stood out was this maze of cobras. Tomb Raider 3 introduces poison as a damage type. Our health bar turns yellow and slowly drains until we use a medipack. The game loves to hide snakes in bushes, around corners, or on precarious ledges where we have no room to dodge, making some of this damage feel unavoidable to a first-time player. This damage type persists throughout this adventure, with Nevada having some rattlesnakes, the South Pacific featuring poison blow darts, and Antarctica pitting us against mutants with poisonous breath. Once we complete these caves, the game reveals its gimmick. This is a somewhat non-linear adventure, as we get to choose the order in which we hunt down the remaining 3 artifacts. This is where I started to question how core design approached this game from a difficulty curve perspective. How can you suitably increase the level of challenge alongside the player's growing skill and arsenal of weapons if you don't know which challenges they've overcome and which guns they've had the opportunity to find? At a basic high level, the answer seems to be designing each location around different types of challenges. Nevada is largely built around platforming and the newly implemented stealth mechanics. The South Pacific is more combat heavy, and London seemed to lean into exploration and puzzle solving. Don't get me wrong, every continent still features all of Tomb Raider's design pillars, but I certainly felt each chapter focusing on certain aspects of Tomb Raider's core offering. Now, there is a community-preferred order. Most people advise us to go to Nevada first, as there's a sequence where we lose our weapons, but don't regain all of them. And it's also the only continent that doesn't feature a boss battle. That said, Stella's Tomb Raider site, great resource by the way, indicates we can get all of our weapons back even if we do Nevada last, so it's really inconsequential. For this playthrough, I decided to listen to my peers and went to the desert first. I have vivid memories of this opening area. I could never get past it as a kid. I figured out that I needed to reach this ledge to then climb this rock, but I never worked out how to get up there. That was very much the case on this return visit too. I ultimately resorted to the strategy guide, chalk up another tally mark, and again the solution was frustratingly simple. There's a very sneakily hidden passageway in the far back corner that leads around and up. I'm not sure that I would have ever found this on my own. The way this nook is presented makes it appear as if it's a dead end. It's bordering on being an optical illusion. Is this just me? Am I alone here, or did this stump anyone else? It's a shame that I didn't get to properly play this level before now, as it's a lot of fun. We get to leap and climb around cliff faces, play with raised and lowered water levels, and use some pretty powerful dynamite to blast our way forwards. There was another instance of the graphics hiding the path. There's an underwater section where we need to pull a lever to open a tunnel. Even when switching between classic and modern graphics, I couldn't find this thing. It's hidden in a corner behind a rock with extremely low colour contrast between the switch and the wall. It's then immediately followed by another switch that not only blends into a wall, but is also obscured by the camera's positioning relative to other level geometry. I also groaned at the end section. I needed a key for a door. I couldn't find it for ages until my daughter joked that the area's hostile biker gang might have left it on the roof. Sure enough, one quad bike ramp later and yeah, it's on the roof for some reason. While I had spotted the on-ramp and been up there, I drove too fast, launched off the roof rather than staying on it, and assumed something might change later. Once I did decide to test my daughter's theory, actually stopping on top of the roof was tricky. I kept sliding off. Those difficulties reinforced my initial idea that there wasn't anything up there. How wrong I turned out to be. I was pleasantly surprised. This went from a level that I was dreading to one I'm actively looking forward to replaying on my next run through this game. It's a decent length at 90 minutes, including my multiple bouts of confusion. There was a good balance of combat, puzzles and platforming, and while the quad bike section was incredibly short-lived, it was a novel way to cap off the stage. The high security compound is a divisive level. Lara has been thrown in jail without due process, decades before the Trump administration. Thankfully, there's a laser grid by her window that opens her cell door. Bit of a design oversight for a prison, but okay. This is Tomb Raider 3's take on the tradition of taking all of the player's weapons away, and it might just be the best one so far, despite taking the longest to actually give us our guns back. I took a liking to this one because Lara's not entirely helpless. We can open other prisoners' cells and let them knock out the guards for us. We also have the new stealth mechanics to help us avoid encounters. To cap it off, the route through the stage is fairly linear and intuitive, being presented as a series of conundrums and obstacles. This is brain over brawn in its entirety. I did get stuck in one section. I dropped down into this water and got sucked into a fan's blade. I knew I needed to swim to either the platform above or the alcove in the corner, but the currents kept drawing me into this central area, making it hard to feel out a safe route. Eventually, trial and error won the day. I got to a side room where I could disable the fan blade, and I was able to progress. Shortly after that, not only do we get our weapons back, but the game's even kind enough to throw in the absolute hand cannon that is the Desert Eagle. This gun is incredible. Great range, huge damage, and a snappy rate of fire. It's probably my favourite addition to this game's loadout. My only concern is that we were incarcerated for breaking into a secret government facility, We then started a prison riot, and we end by gunning down guards who were just doing their jobs.
Are we the baddies?
That very much continues in Area 51, where we're now incentivized to kill enemies before they can trigger alarms and call reinforcements, activate laser grids, or lock down certain rooms. There's even a secret that gets locked off if the alarm's raised. It helps shift the tone from a prison break to a heist. With its laser grids, electrified floors, and heavy presence of technology, this feels more like a James Bond level than a Tomb Raider one, and I love it. I wouldn't be surprised if the original Perfect Dark took a lot of notes from this stage, especially the sci-fi elements of an alien on an operating table, a TARDIS-like space-bending UFO, and whales that, yes, we can swim with. Sadly, this level can be frustrating on a first run due to poor conveyance. The basic stealth mechanics and limited lines of visibility make it difficult to tell when we're safe and when we'll be detected. That also means we're most likely to learn about the alarm system when we trigger it for the first time and reload our last save in frustration. Likewise, some of the lasers near the floor blend in with the background and are hard to see, and the stage can leave us asking, okay, now what? Due to some unclear and enforced backtracking, including one instance that felt like I was retreading half of the level. As mentioned before, this trip to the good old USA ends with a whimper as there's no boss fight. The only resistance is a couple of regular enemies stationed near the artifact that we came here for. I'm torn on Area 51. I love the ideas, the aesthetic, and the hazards. It's certainly a memorable level that stands out, but the execution can be needlessly frustrating. It makes a bad first impression, yet we could probably learn to love it by our third playthrough once we know where to go and what to do. I then moved on to the South Pacific. Its first area, Coastal Village, features another instance of branching paths. The stage is split into two sections: the paths to the village and the village itself. We can either take a route through a locked beach hut, or hike through the jungle and around a cliffside. I took the latter. This area is visually stunning, with some great fixed camera angles for emphasis, even if they make certain jumps a tad harder. It really feels like we're in a dense and dangerous jungle, with the beach, valley, and cliffside temple providing strong landmarks for navigation. I spent a lot of time in this first area as I needed to find 3 stones to progress. One of these was next to the game's most underwhelming secret. Seriously, this counts? I also attempted, and repeatedly failed, a jump that I later learned was a speedrun technique. It looked feasible, and always felt like I was only a hair short, despite not being the developer-intended solution. Once I reached the village, I did feel sorry for its inhabitants. A strange woman shows up and opens fire? Of course they took up arms and tried to kill me. Once again,
Are we the baddies?
the game does something pretty cool here. We can see the route to the next level, but it's across a pool of quicksand. We don't know which rocks will support our weight, allowing us to jump across, so we search the village for answers. We get a map at the end, with the next stage starting us back at this bog. Anyone who saw my previous Tomb Raider videos knows I love when you can see or reach part of another level, as it helps the world feel cohesive and interconnected. One hut includes a seemingly impossible to get medipack. We can't reach it because the floor is actually another sinkhole. I have to admit, the developers got me good with that one. One area that did stump me, and which did feel unfair, were these rooftops. We're supposed to grab these monkey bars and climb our way across to the next section, but they're almost impossible to see, even once we know they're there. The remaster does acknowledge the issue and improve things, with new lighting and contrasts that make the bars a different colour. That does raise one point about the remaster's visuals. The original game had its lighting baked into the textures and was often much more colourful than this new version. Yes, we can switch back to the original graphics at any time, but the often nonsensical spotlights of the old aesthetic gave an eerie and ethereal atmosphere that's lost in the new treatment. The artistic intent seems to have been disregarded in favour of more realistic real-time lighting. Still, Coastal Village made a great first impression on me. It was a cool location, featured varied gameplay, and this opening level had some great set pieces. I was definitely optimistic and looking forward to whatever came next. Sadly, that feeling was short-lived. Having met this year's Feast of Smythe victim, and with the map in hand, we can now access the crash site, a level that outright wasted my time. The level seemed to naturally lead me towards these trees, so I climb them, and the first couple of times I can't find a route forward. After a couple of attempts, I discover an entrance to a cave. Inside, I'm faced with a monkey bar puzzle that, no joke, took me half an hour of attempts before resorting to the strategy guide. We need to reach certain ledges to pull switches that change the routes we can take on the monkey bars. Fair enough. The problem is that one of those switches requires us to lower ourselves down a climbable wall and do a blind backflip onto a ledge that's practically invisible from every camera angle. I had no idea this platform or switch were here. Then, when I reached the end, thinking I'd just completed a substantial chunk of the level, I found myself back where I started. Yeah, this was an optional area. For all that time and effort, I only got some Uzi ammo and a trophy. This isn't worth it. Don't do what I did. Instead, run around the front of the plane to the true path forwards. We run into some soldiers fighting off raptors. Yes, we found this entry's T-Rex level. To pass this stage, we have to find 2 sets of keys for the downed plane, activate a mounted gun turret, and then use that turret to destroy a wall. None of which is told to us. There are also more dead ends, which are thankfully shorter than the caves, and gotcha moments such as this bridge collapsing into a pool of piranhas. Yeah, this is a purposefully obtuse and kind of annoying area. People warned me about one of this level's puzzles. To get past the piranhas, we have to climb a tree, find a strung-up raptor, and shoot it so that it falls into the water, distracting the killer fish and allowing us to swim past unscathed. The problem is that we've rarely used our guns for anything other than combat. While we did shoot out some windows in Tomb Raider 2, and Old Witch has some destructible vent covers, a first-time player might not have encountered either of those, and might not know that our bullets can interact with objects. The only way I could reasonably see someone shooting this raptor down is by somehow mistaking it for an active threat. I imagine most people unsuccessfully looked for a way to get over to the bait and cut the rope, annoying themselves in the process. Once I found both sets of keys, I couldn't find a way into the plane. Most approachers will see Lara slide down the side of it, indicating I was on the wrong track. It turns out that there's a specific approach that will get us up there, but it almost felt like I was brute forcing my way in. Don't get me wrong, the level has its highlights. The T-Rex is well done, putting us inside its den and only having it emerge once we're trapped in its nest. That builds tension and pays it off. There's catharsis to using the mounted gun turret against a wave of raptors at the end, even if it outstayed its welcome to the point that I wondered whether the dinosaurs were infinitely spawning. I'll also defend the stage against people's complaints of accidentally shooting the soldiers and causing them to become hostile. See my Tomb Raider 2 video and my argument in favour of the monks being obvious allies, which is spelled out for us even more here. We met their commanding officer at the end of the last level and promised to help. It's humans versus dinosaurs. Of course we aim our guns at the extinct oversized chickens. The only thing I will agree is that the game's auto-aim will target the soldiers, and when a raptor is near one of them, it's hard to tell who you're shooting at until it's too late. Overall, I'm going to say that I disliked this level the first time through, and I'm not sure how much it would grow on me after repeat visits. That's mainly because I would skip half of it on my next run, especially that cave at the start, and would benefit from considerably less friction, knowing the overall goal and solutions. Just really poor communication and expectation setting throughout this one on the developers' part. Everyone has been warned about Malibu Gorge. We've all been told to fear the dreaded kayak, and now it's my turn to experience the horror. I'm happy to report that, in my humble opinion, the kayak's problems are largely exaggerated. Don't get me wrong, it does not control well, the currents will fight you, it does feel awkward. However, people talk as though we can't fight or go against the currents, and that we're stuck in this thing for the full level, but that couldn't be further from the truth. This is another stage that has two paths, and I wouldn't entertain trying to 100% this stage for that reason. My route saw me platforming along cliff sides, following the river to waterfalls, and ultimately the kayak. After a short, clumsy ride downstream, I was presented with this comically giant plug. After disembarking in a side room, I started another monkey bar section. This is awkward as we have timed flames we need to avoid, but it's hard to judge how close we are to them, even with the remaster's improved camera controls. After that, we're back to platforming and exploring on foot to raise the giant plug. I had been told that getting back in the kayak and down the resulting whirlpool in one piece was near impossible, despite being required, and to expect multiple frustrating attempts. I survived it first time. Maybe that's luck or a fluke, but my experience certainly doesn't line up with what others have reported. I went back through my footage and counted. It took me 63 minutes real time to beat Malibu Gorge. Of that, I spent just 8 minutes in the kayak, and that's on a first run where I didn't know where to go or what to do. Most of that time was spent trying to figure out where to go from the main cavern, as it had 3 exits. I imagine a second playthrough would cut that down to less than 4 minutes of kayaking. Sure, I would rather 0 minutes of a frustrating mechanic than 4, but the rest of the level is solid. Lots of fun traps, some challenging jumps, and an atmosphere that absolutely nails Tomb Raider's signature isolation. I think the community lets one minor gripe spoil the whole thing when it really doesn't need to. The Temple of Puna is another mixed bag. I love everything leading up to the boss fight, but then the quality drops off a cliff. I spoke about that boss earlier though, so let's focus on the positives. This is a dank underground structure with some awesome traps. I adored this puzzle, which requires us to hit 4 switches while avoiding these saw blades. The puzzle and its solution are incredibly simple, but still very satisfying to figure out and execute. Likewise, the room immediately after this, where we have to hit 3 switches to open a door and escape before a spiked ceiling drops on us. I'm trying to choose footage that doesn't spoil either answer here. We then get to run away from multiple boulders in a great set piece, but unfortunately that's all the level really has, clocking in at just under 7 minutes according to the in-game timer, which includes the underwhelming boss. And yeah, that boss drags us down considerably. I'd have loved a longer level with more traps in a similar style, but that's not what we got. One of my main concerns about the South Pacific is that it's too similar to the opening chapter of India. Both take place in jungles and temples, both have a vehicle for their third act, both feature enemies that can inflict poison, and both have similar hazards and traps, most notably quicksand. If a player were to pick the South Pacific as their first continent, they would play 8 levels with the same vibe back to back, potentially giving the wrong impression that this is everything the game has to offer. Granted, the South Pacific has memorable set pieces we won't find in India, such as the tribal village in the downed plain, but is that enough to set it apart? Would players realise or appreciate how much variety Tomb Raider 3 really has? On the other hand, playing the South Pacific as our second or third choice can make it something of a welcome, familiar, and reassuring palate cleanse, which helps the game's overall pacing. I wonder if that's something Core consciously considered when making the game. Thames Wharf kicks off the London chapter with a recurring theme, giving us a choice of multiple intertwining paths, some of which are more obvious than others, and leaving us to figure out a massive puzzle box of an interconnected level where a degree of backtracking will be required. Unless, of course, we use a surprisingly easy speedrun method that finishes the stage in under a minute. I'm glad the developers left this in here, as it's the kind of thing some remakes and remasters would be keen to, air quotes, fix. Saber Interactive took the opposite approach, choosing to award us with a trophy that acknowledges the exploit. Don't worry, I did also play the stage properly and have plenty to say. The opening section of Thames Wharf is all about verticality. We'll be leaping and ziplining around and inside a pair of buildings in order to move a painter's work platform into position. It can be kind of aimless at first, as we slowly untangle where to go and what to do. It's also incredibly precarious, as one wrong move will see Lara fall to her death. The stakes are surprisingly high and punitive for a section's opening level. Imagine coming here straight after India and being met with death after death. After a while, I sort of entered a dance-like state for the opening few actions. I knew which jumps to make, what levers to pull, and when to draw Lara's guns. That probably means I should have saved my game to prevent myself having to repeat the same loop over and over. While the end of level in-game timer clocked me at 39 minutes and 55 seconds, I have, oh dear, an hour and 45 minutes of raw footage. Much of that came from a building with 3 water tanks. It seems straightforward at first. We simply raise and lower the water levels to reach a room with a switch. The problem is that once we press it, the water in the room we just came from drains, meaning we can't get back. I'm a little embarrassed at how long this took me. I was re-inspecting the room with the switch, swapping graphics modes for anything I had missed, and I even started trying to land jumps into a very small pool of water below, all while an incredibly annoying alarm sound effect played on repeat. My best friend, who had already beaten the game, was sat next to me saying, "You're going to be so annoyed when you get this." And he was right. Spoilers for the solution in 3, 2, 1. Much like Coastal Village, there is an overhead grate that we can monkey bar our way across. I'd say this instance is worse than Coastal Village, as the level's geometry, specifically the lowered struts of the ceiling, obscure the mesh we need to cling to. The texture for that mesh is likewise very dark, and outside of the camera's view. We can't reasonably know or intuit that this is here. The rest of the level is somewhat uneventful. We simply climb back up into the rooftops, weaving around barbed wire, kill a couple of guards, and trigger a cutscene. Overall, I enjoyed this one despite some speed bumps. That brings us to Aldwych. This was a confusing level, and I'll pre-warn you now, you're going to hear a lot of complaints from me. We start by falling, always a good sign, with a blink and you'll miss an opportunity to jump for a seemingly missable pickup. That leads us to a ticket office from which we can access multiple disused train platforms. We quickly discover that, while these stations are no longer in use, the lines are. Trains still run along these tracks. One of the stairwells has a gap at the bottom, but something about the way this scene is rendered didn't make that clear, causing me to not see the pit and fall into an area I couldn't immediately escape from, leading to my first of multiple visits to this red room. While there was an exit in the top right-hand corner, it was also locked shut. Thankfully, there is another ceiling we can clamber along, but once again, good luck seeing it. It leads us to a huge vertical shaft with mining equipment chasing us all the way down. Oh, and there's a seemingly missable secret if we just so happen to not know the exact routing for it ahead of time. Just FYI. This will take us to a switch that opens the hatch in the red room we were just in, so we go back and repeat the climb up to it. This is shortly followed by a very tightly timed sprint from switches to timed vault doors. That Croft Manor tutorial really comes into play here. Weirdly, the stakes de-escalate. We have to start with the furthest switch from the furthest door and end with the shortest run. Traditional difficulty design would have that be the reverse, by teaching us with the shortest distance and then challenging us with the longest. At any rate, this gives us a key and puts us back in the ticket office, following Tomb Raider 3's weird habit of presenting the solution of the key before the problem of the locked door. We have no idea where to use it. This is actually one of 2 identical keys. The other one requires us to take a third mandatory trip to the Red Room and climb it yet again. This time, when we get to the top, the mining equipment will already be lowered, and we can run on top of it to access a new area and the key. Nothing prompts us to do this. I found it entirely accidentally. I wouldn't have thought to consciously re-enter that area. So why was I there and how did I find it? See, I wanted to know what would happen if I did make that somewhat hidden jump at the bottom of the escalators. For those curious, nothing, it's just two locked doors we can't open yet and a machine we can't interact with until later. But I'm an idiot and I fell, meaning the only ways back out were to reload a save or go through the red room again. For some reason, I chose the latter, and it's just as well that I did. What if we use the other platform entirely and follow that track? An enemy pops out and races us into the next room, straight into the path of an oncoming train. If we survive that ordeal, we're rewarded with a maze of doors and switches where we need to find the right combination that will let us through to the next area. Frustratingly, the sheer number of doors and switches means that there are a lot of permutations. It quickly becomes very difficult to keep track of which switches affect which doors in which ways. After around 15 minutes, I thankfully made it out through sheer trial and error brute force. It didn't feel engaging or satisfying. This leads us to a gallery where we can use the Solomon's keys we collected earlier, assuming we did everything in the correct order, which the game never hints at. This gives us a gavel that we again can't use yet, another solution looking for a puzzle. Speaking of, there's also a gear for accessing what turned out to be an optional area hidden behind this curtain. It was only revealed to me because I fell in this hole, and the camera briefly clicked through the, as it turns out, passable wall. So we now have a collection of items, but nowhere to actually use them. Cue a few confused loops around the level looking for something we've missed and finding absolutely nothing. Here's an infuriating realization. Back at the start of the level, there was an easily missable grate in the wall that looks like it's seen better days. It turns out that grate is destructible. We can shoot at it, but much like Tomb Raider 2's glass windows, there's nothing indicating that. Not even an auto demo showcasing it like 2's PS1 version had. Plus, this is metal, which tends to be more durable than glass. There is another destructible grate on one of the platforms that leads to an optional room with some goodies, and I suppose we might accidentally shoot it while taking out enemies here, but yeah, this one's also easily missed. In a segment that felt more like a point-and-click adventure than a Tomb Raider game, destroying this grate gets us above the ticket office, into the customer service desk, and nets us a key that we can use on one of the platforms to access a room where we can turn the power back on. Doing that springs a machine back into life that drops a coin. We can use that coin on one of the ticket machines, and my word, am I grateful for the remaster's addition of an interaction icon, because I might have missed this otherwise. That then gives us a ticket. Problem, I have yet to see anything that would require a ticket. It turns out that if we take this path from one of the platforms into this climbing section, we can find a ticket barrier. That leads us into a new section where we can use the items we found earlier to reach the end of the level. Here's my biggest issue with Aldwych. There are 3 threads that we can start pulling on from the start, but we don't know that. Each of those 3 threads allow us to make a good chunk of progress before dead-ending us. Let's say we destroyed a grate at the start and followed that through to getting the ticket and accessing the second major area, only to find one path blocked by a padlocked door, another by a vintage train car, and a third by overhead shutters with no indication of where to go or what to do. Alternatively, let's say we complete that agonizing maze of switches and doors first, only to reach the gallery without either of Solomon's keys. That would certainly take the wind out of our sails. I somehow accidentally lucked into a somewhat optimal order by visiting the Red Room first, and even that led to a jarring, poorly paced, and frustrating experience. Fortunately, the level is fairly good at providing shortcuts between the major areas to reduce the amount of backtracking. If we do find ourselves blocked, we can easily get back to past areas and try something new. We just might not have any idea what that something new is. I'll just come out and say that Aldwych is poorly designed. It presents too many leads, allows us to make too much progress along one path without knowing that others exist, and has multiple significant opportunities for us to find puzzle solutions before the puzzles themselves. Most of the areas look similar, and that lack of visual distinction makes it hard to navigate or place landmarks. It features a literal maze, and there is no excuse for requiring 3 trips through the Red Room. It was an incredibly aggravating and annoying 2.5 hours, and one of my least favourite Tomb Raider levels in the franchise to date. I take no shame in saying I referred to the strategy guide 3 times to beat it, so add those to the tally, please. I can already hear certain members of the audience thinking, if you hated Old Witch, you're going to despise Lud's Gate. Surprisingly, I found Lud's Gate to be overhated. The 2 main complaints tend to concern the stealth section and the underwater section. I'll discuss each gripe in detail as we reach them. For now, I'll simply say that Lud's Gate has got its fair share of issues, but it's enjoyable. I found the context especially interesting. We meet Sophia's old test subjects, who now live underground, and agree to break into the Natural History Museum to steal some embalming fluid for them. In return, they will open an underwater access tunnel into Sophia's headquarters. The museum's setting allows the game to blend London with Egypt for a visually memorable level. Again, we have 2 seemingly viable paths at the start, and both contain slides that prevent us going back and checking out the other one, at least without doing a loop of half the level. This is especially annoying as the left path contains one of the level's secrets. Nothing like having to make a decision with 0 context, something the entire London chapter loves to do. Whichever path we take will eventually come to this platforming room, seemingly part of an Egyptian exhibit. Certain pillars and gates move as we make progress, and I feel a little silly in admitting I got stuck here for a very long time. I knew I needed to get up to the top corner, I just couldn't work out how. Add a tally to the strategy guide sheet, as it turns out I somehow missed a basic switch on the wall right here. At first I wanted to argue that there wasn't enough colour contrast between the wall and the switch, and it was a case of poor visual design. However, the more I look at my footage, the harder it is for me to make that argument. I think I just have to take the loss here and book myself an eye test. Something Tomb Raider 3 does fairly frequently, and was made very obvious with a double whammy here, is hiding enemies in unfair positions. We will not be able to see or respond to them until they've had the opportunity to shoot first. There's an especially bad instance where we crawl out of a vent to a guard that we previously couldn't see, unloading clips straight into our head, but we can't do anything until Lara's transition animation from crawling to standing has been completed. That's far from exclusive to this level, just acutely felt here. Now for a really annoying bit. We have to dangle over a Sphinx's head and drop down onto it. On our first pass, the camera angle changes so we can see where we're dropping to, but if we grab the save crystal on the other side of this gap and then go back, that helpful camera angle doesn't reappear. If we miss, we won't die, we'll just slide down the Sphinx's head and be locked out of a secret. If we land on the single tile at the top, we'll probably still miss the secret. We also have to make a choice here. There's a rocket pickup here, which I believe is the rocket launcher if we don't already have it, but without glitches, we can only go down after grabbing it. That means we'll miss a secret off to the side, a secret which requires a very precise and finicky jump to even attempt to reach. Yeah, this game is seemingly designed to frustrate anyone who wants to get all secrets, pickups, and kills. I can only imagine how irritating it is to trophy hunt. That said, this Sphinx in the middle of a museum is a very cool visual. This is the main room that I remember from this stage. See? I can say nice things. And I'll continue to praise this level. We return with the embalming fluid and open the underwater path to Sophia's headquarters. This is where we're introduced to the Underwater Propulsion Vehicle, or UPV for short. Now, the way people talk about this thing, I was expecting to be using it for the entire level and for it to control poorly. Again, much like the kayak, those claims have been greatly exaggerated. My only concerns with the UPV's controls were that I had to disembark to pick up items and that I couldn't go directly up or down, instead having to kind of spin during long climbs. There are common complaints about a stealth section here, featuring what the fandom has dubbed the Frogman. I was told that I would hate this, that it's unfair, and a terrible stealth section. I don't see where people are coming from. We're shown the Frogman ahead of time as the camera focuses on him. We then get to observe the room he's in through the window of a safe area. Once we're in there, the path we need to take is fairly linear, with plenty of crates to crawl behind. Oh, and if we fail, we can still continue with the level, we just lose access to a secret. Nevada had more frequent stealth sections with less clear rules and harsher punishments for failure, but this is the instance everyone complains about? Guys, come on! The next common issue we hear about is the maze that follows. Accusations include that people don't know where to go or what to do, that it's hard to navigate, and that Lara is borderline guaranteed to run out of air. Calling this a maze is unfair. It's a hub-and-spoke design with colour-coded tunnels and a reliable spot to catch our breath. Each corridor leads to either a switch or a unique and memorable room where we complete an on-foot challenge. Those typically unlock another door back in the hub, with the camera showing us what we just opened and the colour coding making it clear which tunnel we need to go down. Maybe it's because everyone set me up to have low expectations, but I actually enjoyed this stretch of the level. I seem to give this advice fairly regularly on this channel, but we shouldn't always listen to the internet echo chamber that parrots the same opinions over and over again. We need to play these games for ourselves and come to our own conclusions. All that's left is a boss fight with Sophia Lee. This is a very short level, and we already talked about the vertical race in the narrative section, so I'll just say that this was an interesting subversion and a nice way to end the London chapter. London really stood out to me, and I found myself having far more to say about it than I expected to. I adored the vibes. Nighttime in the city, industrial settings, and catsuits? Hell yes! While the South Pacific felt like India Part 2, London's levels brought a lot of variety in not just their visuals, but their challenges. With fairly limited combat encounters, gravity became our most common and unforgiving enemy throughout the chapter, as we were left to tease out massive puzzle boxes. It didn't always hit the mark. Aldwych sucks. But London certainly made an effort. Antarctica, the final stretch of the game, doesn't have the same core challenge when it comes to designing its difficulty curve. We can only get here after completing everything that came before, so while the game's middle chapters each had to focus on one specific pillar of Tomb Raider's design, Nevada tested our stealth abilities, the South Pacific assessed our combat and platforming skills, and London focused on puzzle design, Antarctica gets to combine all of those elements back together. That doesn't prevent it from adding a few new twists of its own, too. The water is now freezing cold, so Lara now has an oxygen and hypothermia bar when swimming. That simple change transforms the way we see the water and makes us much more cautious as we platform around it. It took me a little while to find Antarctica's first thread to pull on. The boat stood out, it was clear I needed to get on that. The question was how. My first attempt saw me ending up in an optional side room, as I teased out what Lara would slide on and what was safe footing. A short swim climb later, and I was quickly making progress. This was a fun and frankly gorgeous level with a ton of variety. There was precarious platforming, there was a vehicle, there were armed guards around every corner, and more environmental traps than you can shake a stick at. It strikes a delicate balance between giving us just enough direction that we never feel completely stuck, while leaving things open enough that we feel accomplished when we figure it out and open the path forwards. There's even some cool incidental storytelling, as we encounter a mutated researcher in a jump scare that Lara mentions in the next cutscene where, after spending a whole level being shot at, she's much more distrusting of Willard. This level is kind of underrated. It's a great blend of everything that makes for a good Tomb Raider experience. Sure, it doesn't stand out or draw much attention to itself, but it also doesn't do anything that would make it stick in our minds for the wrong reasons either. We follow Willard underground into the RX tech mines, another level infamous for vehicle segments that annoy a lot of players. Can you guess what I'm going to say about them? Before we get to that, the stage starts with a gotcha moment. We're running through these vents and quickly realise we're doing a loop. Pressure plates on the floor are opening and closing doors, so we need to turn around at a certain point to escape. Not too tricky to figure out, and a novel moment. We then get a really nice show don't tell tutorial, as we see a flamethrower guard take out 2 mutants. We're safely behind a chain link fence, so it's pretty much guaranteed that we'll see this. The guards will only become hostile if we shoot them first, or are playing on New Game Plus, and the remaster adds a fun trophy for getting Willard's men to do our dirty work for us by luring enough mutants over to one of them. It also conveys a narrative. Something has gone wrong, researchers are transforming, and Willard is torching the evidence. Some A+ game design here. Sadly, the mutants spew a poisonous gas, including on death, and the placements of some of these enemies is downright unfair. We will find our health bar turning yellow, and either wasting a medipack to cure ourselves, or reloading a recent save. They're a frustrating foe that deserve to burn. We're almost immediately thrown into a 3-story hub area with multiple minecart tracks we can explore, and this is where the level's 2 main complaints stem from. The first is a repeat of London in not knowing which of these multiple paths to tackle first, or which ones are even viable. There's a lot of potential for having our time wasted. In my case, I took the top path first and tried, unsuccessfully, to dive down to the bottom of this pool. We'll come back to this later on. The second issue is the minecart controls themselves. The minecarts don't control in the same way as any other vehicle. Instead, we have to shift Lara's weight left and right to take corners, but more importantly, forwards and backwards to gain and lose speed. There are some frustrating moments, such as needing to slow down enough so that we don't tip on this turn, but still being fast enough to make the jump immediately after it. Or being hurtled down this slope, over a jump, and then straight into a turn. Not to mention, there's a really irritating squeaking sound effect every time we shift our weight. That said, on its own, shifting Lara's weight might not be terrible. I adjusted to it surprisingly quickly, and was again thinking people had overstated their complaints. If only it ended there. What made it unforgivable is that we also have to duck under hazards and swing a wrench to switch which track we're on, or, at times, make the cart stop. I found those 2 things added that little bit too much mechanical complexity, too many variables to consider, and the unresponsive timing of that wrench swing in particular made it hard to reliably do what the game was asking of me. This was incredibly annoying when I missed a stop and had to repeat the entire loop, or reload a save, to try again. Where I gave the kayak and UPV a relative pass, because, unlike the rumours, you don't spend anywhere near as much time in them as people claim, the minecarts are a regular and frequent feature of the RX tech mines. The other major difference is that the kayak and UPV gave us relative freedom of movement, while the minecarts are quite literally on rails, and we can easily be forced to repeat loops while simply getting our bearings. We will be spending a good chunk of time on these rollercoaster rides, and they're not fun. The middle path leads us to a vertical chasm we need to carefully navigate, along with a jump scare from a massive super mutant. This drop also has the worst placed regular mutant in the whole game. How the hell are we meant to avoid getting poisoned in this tiny crawl space? Fortunately, that path is at least viable, leading us to the crowbar. This in turn will open a door later so we can get a battery. The lowest path takes us to an old facility where, probably best to give a photosensitive epilepsy warning, skip to the timecode on screen, otherwise, 3, 2, 1, the power is on the fritz, leaving us trapped in dark, flashing rooms and corridors with super mutants. Thankfully we can use flares to reduce the effect, it's probably what we're supposed to do, but from an accessibility standpoint, I'd have liked to see the remaster alter this section. We'll find a winch at the end of this area, and now, with that and the battery from earlier, we can return to the top path and actually complete the level. I mentioned this pool earlier. When I first visited it, I didn't know that I needed items from other parts of the level before I could dive down to the bottom of it, as the dead end was poorly conveyed. Giving me access to somewhere to catch my breath and somehow warm back up despite being surrounded by ice, as well as an open hatch in the pod, led me to believe the dive was possible, especially as I could just about reach a locked door before dying. It turns out that this piece of machinery besides the pool is interactive, and we can use both the battery and winch to lower the submersible, making the freezing cold dive down to the door viable, but only just. See, once we're through the door, we still need to swim to another point where we can warm back up, and the game gives us barely enough time to reach it. The developers knew what they did too, as they give us a large metapack inside the pod immediately beforehand, and another one when we surface at the other end. This swim took me 7 attempts. Our execution has to be perfect here, and we're not done. It's followed by swimming up a shaft that saw me simply chewing through medipacks to brute force it. And you know what? I think that's the intended method. Thankfully, we're now at the end of the stage, with a nice transition into the lost city of Tinos. I'm kind of torn on the RX tech mines. The minecarts were novel once I got the hang of their controls. I do like levels where we need to go away and find items to solve a central puzzle, as long as that goal is well communicated. And seeing enemies interact and fight each other is always fun, if we can avoid getting caught in the crossfire. It's a series of, this is cool, but... At the very least, it tries, and I can respect the effort. The Lost City of Tinos gives us one final gauntlet before the final boss, and oh boy, we have a lot to talk about. First and foremost, this level is prime Tomb Raider and a perfect way to cap off a game. We're deep underground in an ancient lost civilization. We have to complete themed trials to earn masks to push our way through to the finale. It brings together every mechanic we've learned so far and tests us on them. It is textbook endgame material. There's a puzzle near the start of the level that had me stumped. There's a series of switches, and the right combination of them will open the door forwards. There are symbols around the buttons, and I got as far as thinking it might represent the food chain, but I couldn't get the right combo of switches. After a lot of swapping graphics modes, searching the previous room again for hints, and getting a tad annoyed, yeah, I reached straight for the strategy guide. So it turns out it was the food chain, but where I was reading clockwise, man eats bird, bird eats fish. Oh, but fish doesn't eat bird, so that one's out. I should have noticed that the middle symbols are always mirrored, and read it top to bottom. That would make it man eats bird, bird eats fish, so valid. On reviewing my footage, there are arrows on the wall pointing down to denote that, but I'm still saying this one's on the game, not me. Don't have 4 images for 3 pieces of information. This leads to a giant broken bridge, which is such a cool visual. This is where the Firefly-like enemies turn up. I mentioned these way back in the secrets section, and here they're highlighting the invisible platforms was a really awesome visual hint, as well as a callback to the opening India section where flames revealed hidden ledgers. But it leads to a secret away from the main path. They infinitely respawn, and their corpses retain collision, screwing up our jumps. These enemies continue to reappear throughout the level, and it seems that in some rooms there is a finite, albeit high number of them, whereas other areas never stop spawning them. There's one room later on where these things appear midway through. Instant frustration. Trying to do this monkey bar section while these bugs are spawning and can knock us off? Yeah, no thank you. Another new enemy arrives in the form of these giant monstrous guardians. They have 2 moves. They can either keep their distance and fire blue energy balls at us, or charge at us for melee damage. They feel fitting for the finale, they add that supernatural undercurrent which the franchise is known for, and we have the weapons and ammo to deal with the threat. Alright, let's talk about these challenges. We can do these in any order, so I'll just chat through them in the order that I tackled them. First up was an underwater switch puzzle through spinning blades. The main challenge here was depth perception. I couldn't tell how close Lara was to the blades, and therefore whether I was safe. Otherwise, a fairly standard challenge of balancing limited air, timing through obstacles, and searching for levers. The second trial starts by combining India and the South Pacific's quicksand with the giant glowing green hornets. These enemies swarm us, causing, as far as I know, unavoidable damage because we can't draw or use our guns while wading through the mud. Once we survive that, it's a short walk through a cave to the mask we came for. The interesting part comes after we collect it, as it causes a cave-in. This changes the route back, introducing pits, pools of lava, and collapsing ceilings. It's a fun 3D take on a Metroid escape sequence, although this one set of falling rocks felt unavoidable for a first-time player who doesn't know it's coming. The next trial had my favourite aesthetic. Everything's done over lava. The first part is seemingly trial and error. If we jump on the wrong pillar, flames will erupt and consume us, with there seemingly being no way of telling what the safe route is without continuously experimenting, dying, and reloading our save to slowly learn and memorize the sequence. That's followed by more invisible platforms that are revealed by fire-breathing statues. The challenge is that same fire will also cook us. This involves some cool leaps of faith. We know the platforms are there, we just have to trust ourselves and go at pace before the statues reactivate. We have one more area to go, and sadly I didn't save the best for last. This one's just a maze. That's it, find the exit. There is some cool boulder dodging at the end, but yeah, this was by far the weakest mask to collect. Now, collecting the masks isn't everything, as I found out the hard way by walking into the beam of light, fully expecting it to teleport me to the final boss, but instead being instantly killed. We also need to visit this Colosseum room against a bunch of those giant monsters from earlier, and this vertical room with switches turning certain platforms on and off to retrieve keys that disable the killer light show. I didn't mind the arena. This is the ending, and we needed a combat skill check. It did take me a little longer to figure out the sequence for the platforming challenge, as I didn't consider that I might have to use one switch a second time, and I talked about this clamber when we discussed these massive wasp things, but overall, not as bad as some make it out to be. Now, I do know about the game's hardest secret, where we have to sprint from this room back to the broken bridge. I didn't do it. This was a natural playthrough rather than an all-secrets run. I knew going in that Tomb Raider 3 is one of the most difficult and frustrating set of secrets, partly due to the split paths in some levels. So yeah, I skipped it. Overall, Lost City of Tinnis has some missteps, but it's a great way to wrap up our adventure. All that leaves is a meteorite cavern, which houses the final boss. Willard's next stage in human evolution seemingly being a giant, disgusting thing that's not a spider. I think arachnids have 8 legs and I count 4. Pedantry aside, we can take this thing down, but it will always get back up again. Made far easier to see by the remaster's addition of health bars for bosses. What we need to do is remove the 4 artifacts found around the chamber and then kill Willard. Problem is, Willard has an incredibly cheap one-hit kill homing shot, so we have to down him, sprint to collect an artifact, return to the middle, and then repeat the process. That's a total of 5 times we have to put him down. We also have to be careful while engaging Willard. We're on a small platform with a hole in the middle and instant kill goo on all sides. It doesn't leave a lot of room to fight. We also need to be mindful of where our feet are because, and this took me ages to figure out, if we step over the white lines on the floor, it will trigger Willard's BS insta-death move. I'm glad there's a clear marker for us. Do not step over this line. But it took me an embarrassing number of attempts, and what felt like unfair deaths, before realising these lines in the floor weren't just decorative. One nice thing about this finale is that the level doesn't end when Willard dies. We have to make our escape. Now, Tomb Raider 1 had this with a small platforming section after Natla died, and Tomb Raider 2 had a blink-and-you'll-miss-it sprint through a collapsing tunnel, but Tomb Raider 3 gets the best in the series so far. We get to look over the battlefield and reflect as we climb. We're then placed in Willard's camp where we have to kill the last few guards before stealing a helicopter. It's short, yes, but it's triumphant. It brings the curve down nicely from the climactic battle, giving us a chance to process our adventure. And that's Tomb Raider 3. The game has a reputation for being brutally hard and unfair with poor pacing, but that wasn't the experience I had. Earlier, I asked you to guess how many times I would have to refer to the strategy guide, and it's time for the big reveal. I reached for the guide a total of 8 times, 3 of which were in Aldwych. Given the game's reputation, I didn't expect that figure to be in the single digits. The difficulty curve is weird, I'll agree that much, because the player can visit 3 of the 5 continents in any order. That means the developers couldn't have a balanced natural escalation of the game's combined elements. As we've seen, their solution was to make each continent focus on a different core pillar of Tomb Raider's design philosophy. The problem is that the blend and balance is what makes Tomb Raider, well, Tomb Raider, and each fan likes each ingredient in different measures. People who love the more obtuse and isolated puzzle box levels will enjoy London, while those who gravitate towards the combat might find that section too slow and frustrating, finding themselves instead getting more enjoyment from the South Pacific. That's not to say the other pillars are entirely absent, but we can certainly feel that different continents play certain mechanics in a starring role. That leads to a seemingly inevitable situation where the player experience will be uneven. There will be a favourite and least favourite segment of the game, and those stretches will be different for each of us. There's a continent we look forward to, and then one we simply have to power through. It proves that none of Tomb Raider's individual mechanics are strong enough to carry an entire game on their own. It's the mixing pot that gives the series its charm. It's telling that they didn't try this again. Every Tomb Raider after 3 would essentially be linear, featuring a balance of all of its ingredients throughout. Yes, even accounting for the interconnected levels of The Last Revelation and more experimental nature of Angel of Darkness. This meant the creative team could consistently provide a mixture of each gameplay element while increasing the overall difficulty proportionately and appropriately. The other common sore point that I found myself largely disagreeing with were the vehicles. I felt their controls, while unconventional at times, were at least manageable after an adjustment period. We spend a lot less time in them than you would think, given their portrayal in other videos about this title. Generally, they provided a nice change of pace, being, if nothing else, memorable. That said, I can imagine that the PlayStation release, the one most people would have played back in the day, was significantly harder due to the save system we discussed near the start of the video. Making save crystals a collectible, trying to combine the fixed position single-use saves of Tomb Raider 1 with the save anywhere freedom of Tomb Raider 2, actually gave us the worst of both worlds, with the crystals being spread out, hidden too few and far between. I can't begin to imagine how much progress I would have lost, and how angry I would have gotten had I been playing the PS1 version instead of this remaster. Perhaps that's where this entry's reputation for unfair difficulty truly stems from. As it stands in the remaster, the version people are most likely to play going forwards, I found this to be a fair challenge overall. When I looked at Tomb Raider 2, I noted that the game expects you to have played the first game, as the difficulty picks up where that original entry left off. I don't think the same disclaimer applies to Tomb Raider 3. Given the tutorial in Lara's home, and the jack-of-all-trades nature of the opening India section, I could feasibly see someone starting the series here. Yes, the needle starts higher than it should, and Temple Ruins is one hell of a cold shower, but it's more manageable than we might think. I played most of the remaster in the new graphics. However, when I switched back, I noticed the lighting was often significantly different. In some cases, this was a detriment, losing baked-in colours that added atmosphere to certain scenes. In most cases, it was practical and helpful, making monkey bars and ceilings actually visible. The side effect is that, like Tomb Raider 2's remaster, flares become more or less optional with the new lighting, even in areas that clearly required them before. In all cases though, it changed the mood and tone. Whether that's a good thing is ultimately going to be subjective and a case of personal preference. For my money, the remaster looked gorgeous. Almost none of the platforms or puzzle hints were obscured, and there were very few times where I found myself saying, how was I supposed to see that? In fact, the higher resolution textures made one puzzle in Antarctica easier to understand. We have a problem concerning choice. While the Tomb Raider 4 to 6 remasters offer the classic graphics at 60 FPS, 1 to 3 is still stuck at 30 FPS, although seemingly presented inside a 60 FPS container with uneven frame pacing and noticeable juddering. That's to my eyes, as someone who's usually not sensitive to these things, so the classic graphics will feel unplayable for some. There are mods for the PC version which fix this, but if you're on console, you're SOL, and I can understand this being a potential deal breaker. I would highly recommend Tomb Raider 3, especially now that it's available in a very reasonably priced remaster with a much more flexible save system. If you are picking up the trilogy, it makes sense to play through 1 and 2 first, simply to appreciate the new mechanics that get introduced over time. I could certainly see myself returning to 1 and forgetting that I can't sprint or crawl. Don't go for a completionist run. The level design actively works against that, and from watching a few 100% playthroughs, some of the secrets seem obnoxious, adding frustration to a game that can already have brief moments where it tests our patience. One final tip would be to play Nevada first. I know several resources point out that we can regain our full arsenal before the final boss, even if we choose Nevada last, but I'd hate to get used to having the most powerful weapons before being stripped of them. It would increase that whiplash tenfold. Doing Nevada first, I didn't have that many guns to lose anyway. My final message is simply play Tomb Raider 3. It's fantastic. I'd place it above 2, but still below 1. The original has the benefit of rose-tinted nostalgia goggles for me, and it provided an overall more consistent and evenly paced playing experience. I do want to play through Tomb Raider 1, 2, and 3's expansions. Those levels were previously PC exclusive, so new to me, and reportedly developed by a different team with a different approach to level design, so it'll be interesting to see where they diverge, and whether it's for the better or worse. I also already have the second remastered trilogy in my collection, evidence that it took me far too long to make these videos, so I will be playing The Last Revelation, Chronicles, and Angel of Darkness at some point. I am painfully aware that this video took me a while, and I don't want to burn myself out on Tomb Raider, as it's a series I love. I never want to make a video out of obligation, and cards on the table, I felt like I was bordering on that at points during the production of this video. As such, I will be taking a break from this series of games. I had already announced that my next video, the channel's 100th review, and, looking at the numbers, possibly my 10,000 subscriber special, is Sonic the Hedgehog 2006. There's also a couple of other games I've been playing that I wouldn't mind talking about, although again no promises so I don't fall into that obligation zone, before we circle back around to Tomb Raider. If that sounds interesting to you, you know what to do. Subscribe, hit the bell, like the video, leave a comment, share the video with a friend, all of that good stuff. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can support the channel via Patreon, just like Crow, Tiny Jericho, Mr. Terry Chaos, Ducky Go, Francis T218, and The Liberator. Thanks again, and I'll see you all soon.